The ramp wasn't even all the way down. Before the machine guns opened fire, bullets ripped through the front of the landing craft. Men in the first row fell instantly. Others dove over the sides into water far deeper than they expected. Some never came back up. June 6, 1944. The United States Army had arrived at Omaha Beach. For months, these soldiers had trained for this moment, studied maps, memorized objectives, practiced beach assaults again and again. None of it could prepare them for what waited beyond that steel ramp. As the landing craft crossed the final stretch toward Normandy, no one spoke. The only sounds were the engines, the crashing waves, and the distant thunder of naval guns hammering the coastline ahead. Some soldiers checked their rifles one last time. Others gripped photographs tucked inside their jackets. Many simply stared at the shoreline, waiting, watching, wondering if they would survive the next few minutes. Then the coxswain shouted, 30 seconds! The boat rocked violently as artillery shells exploded nearby. Water sprayed over the bow. The shoreline disappeared behind smoke. No one knew if the naval bombardment had destroyed the German defenses. They were about to find out. The landing craft scraped against the sand. The ramp dropped. Chaos. Machine gun fire tore across the opening. Mortar rounds exploded in the surf. German artillery sent towering columns of water crashing over nearby boats. Within seconds, the carefully organized assault dissolved into a fight for survival. Some soldiers sprinted toward the beach. Others were hit before taking a single step. Many jumped into water carrying more than 70 pounds of equipment. The weight dragged them beneath the surface. Some struggled free. Others disappeared forever. Those who reached the beach found almost no cover. German fire poured down from the bluffs overlooking Omaha. Concrete bunkers, hidden trenches, interlocking machine gun positions. Every yard forward felt impossible. Men pressed themselves against steel beach obstacles. Anything that might stop a bullet. Medics crawled through the sand to reach the wounded. Engineers struggled to clear lanes through mines and obstacles while under relentless fire. Officers shouted orders that were often drowned out by explosions. Entire units became separated within minutes. The invasion plan was unraveling. No one knew where neighboring companies were. No one knew which officers were still alive. The only mission that mattered now? Stay alive. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. Small groups of strangers began joining together. A lieutenant without a platoon. A sergeant missing his squad. A private who had landed hundreds of yards from his assigned sector. Rank mattered less than action. If someone was willing to lead, others followed. Instead of waiting for new orders, these small groups started moving. One bunker at a time, one trench at a time, one machine gun nest at a time. Engineers crawled forward carrying Bangalore torpedoes. Explosives blasted openings through barbed wire. Riflemen rushed through the gaps before the smoke cleared. Grenades disappeared into bunker entrances. Flamethrower teams forced defenders out of hardened positions. The climb up the bluffs had begun. It wasn't one massive breakthrough. It was dozens of desperate attacks happening all along the beach. Each captured position made the next one possible. Each silent machine gun gave the soldiers below another chance to move. Slowly, almost unbelievably, the Americans began reaching the top. Looking back from the bluffs, the view was staggering. The beach was covered with wrecked landing craft. Smoke drifted across the shoreline. Medics still treated the wounded in the sand. Fresh waves of soldiers continued arriving despite the relentless fire. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time that morning, the army had momentum. The German defenses that had seemed impossible to overcome were beginning to collapse. By afternoon, more troops were pushing inland. Engineers cleared exits from the beach. Artillery pieces were dragged ashore. Communication lines were restored. The fragile foothold at Omaha was growing stronger with every passing hour. As evening settled over Normandy, the firing finally began to slow. The cost had been staggering. Thousands of Americans had been killed, wounded, or were missing. Entire units had been shattered, yet Omaha Beach had not fallen. It had been taken. The men who survived that morning didn't celebrate. There was no victory parade, no speeches, only exhaustion, relief, and the knowledge that tomorrow, the fight would continue. History remembers D-Day as the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. But for the soldiers who crossed Omaha Beach, it wasn't about history. It was about the man beside them. The next 50 yards, the next bunker, the next breath. On June 6, 1944, the United States Army faced one of the most brutal combat landings in military history. Against overwhelming fire, they refused to stop, and by refusing to stop, they secured the foothold that helped change the course of the war forever. The beach had become a trap. Every attempt to cross the open sand ended the same way. Small teams worked their way from one position to the next, not charging across open ground, but climbing through shell craters, ditches, and narrow draws carved into the hillside. Every few yards brought another bunker, another machine gun, another fight. Some positions surrendered, most didn't. Many had to be cleared room by room. Grenade first, rifle second, move to the next. Then something happened the German defenders hadn't expected. American soldiers began appearing beside them, not in front of them. The strong points were built to fire toward the beach. Once small groups reached the top of the bluffs, they attacked from the flanks and rear. Machine gun nests that had dominated the shoreline for hours suddenly found themselves surrounded. One by one, the guns fell silent. Below, the soldiers still pinned on the beach noticed something incredible. The fire was easing. Not everywhere, but enough. For the first time that morning, men who had been trapped behind obstacles started moving inland. Fresh waves reached the beach. This time, they found narrow paths already opening through the defenses. Engineers widened the exits. Medics established aid stations behind the first ridgeline. Communication lines slowly came back to life. What had started as isolated groups fighting for survival was becoming an organized advance. By early afternoon, American troops were moving beyond the bluffs. German defenders continued fighting fiercely. Snipers remained hidden in hedgerows. Mortars still landed among advancing units. But the impossible had happened. Omaha Beach had not broken the invasion. The army had broken through. And for the men who had survived those first terrifying hours, there was no time to celebrate. Ahead of them, France still had to be liberated. For the first time that day, the invasion had room to breathe. The desperate fight for survival had become a determined push forward. As evening settled over Normandy, the smoke hanging over the beach began to thin. The tide rolled around shattered landing craft. Weapons and equipment lay scattered across the sand. Corpsmen still searched for the wounded. Engineers continued clearing mines and obstacles long after the shooting had slowed. Many soldiers finally had a chance to look back. Only hours earlier, that same stretch of beach had seemed impossible to cross. Now, it was the gateway into occupied Europe. The cost had been staggering. Thousands of American soldiers had been killed, wounded, or gone missing. Entire platoons had ceased to exist. Friends who had trained together, crossed the channel together, and landed together would never leave Normandy. Yet despite every setback, the beachhead held. Not because one commander changed the battle, not because one unit broke through, but because hundreds of small acts of courage happened at exactly the right moment. A medic refusing to leave the wounded, an engineer crawling forward with explosives, a sergeant rallying men he'd never met, a rifleman charging one more bunker, again and again and again. History remembers June 6th as the beginning of the liberation of Western Europe. For the men who fought across Omaha Beach, it was simply the longest day of their lives. They didn't know how the war would end. They didn't know they would become part of history. They only knew the mission in front of them. Take the beach, break through the German defenses, keep moving. The United States Navy had carried them across the channel. The Army Air Forces had fought to secure the skies above them. But in the end, victory depended on ordinary soldiers willing to leave the safety of a landing craft, run through impossible odds, and refuse to stop. One step, one bunker, one ridge, at a time. On June 6th, 1944, the United States Army turned a narrow strip of sand into the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. And because they never stopped moving forward, the road to the liberation of Europe was finally opened.